Okay, so I just finished watching the first movie Before Sunrise, the first movie in our film festival slash trilogy project. And I didn't really know much going into this movie. I read a very brief description and it kind of made it seem like it was going to be a one night stand. But it was not that at all, which was surprising, and it was a nice surprise. I was glad that it was not just about these people randomly meeting up, having a one night stand, and then having to figure out their life. I feel like that's kind of more of a modern take on those types of movies, and I'm really glad that it didn't take that route. It was a very unique, almost love story. But so this movie, one of the questions on the prompt was kind of how does this movie make you feel? And I think this movie really makes me feel, really makes me question love and, you know, the right way to find love and all of that. I mean, throughout the entire thing, Celine and Jesse were talking about, you know, oh, they shouldn't be here, but they're having a great time. And they talked a lot about their past relationships and, you know, why they didn't work, you know, and they were even comparing other people's relationships. For example, Celine's grandmother, you know, she was married to a man, and Celine just assumed she didn't have this very interesting love life when in reality she had been in love and fantasizing about a different man her whole life. And then you have Jesse's family, who I won't summarize it all because you already know, but whose parents didn't get along so well and they got divorced. So it was really interesting to see them comparing love stories, because they were almost kind of comparing it to the one that they were in now and almost questioning, like, is this even possible that we're falling in love so quickly? So it kind of really makes you question, is there a right way to fall in love? For the most part, one of my favorite scenes and whenever I kind of really felt most intrigued in the story is whenever they were I think there was only about half hour left in the movie, and they were sitting in a cafe or a diner, and Celine decided, like, oh, I'm gonna pretend to call a friend. And Jesse kind of at first didn't know what was going on, and so she's like, pick up, and she starts telling him her feelings for him. And I thought that was just so like powerful and interesting, and it just really shows how scared like we can be as humans falling in love. It's almost like she could tell Jesse about her love, but she couldn't tell him as him. He had to pretend to be someone else, and he almost had to do the same thing. So I thought that was really interesting, and I loved how at the end of that, Jesse started to get so into it that he like put away his phone, but then had to remember, oh, we're talking on the phone, just to make it more comfortable. And the last thing that I really thought was very interesting about this movie was throughout the whole entire time, it's most of the setting is kind of happening at night, and there's all these like beautiful lights, you know, city lights, carnival lights, and even in the park, it's the moonlight, and it's really beautiful. And at the very end, they show all of where they've been, and it's daylight, and it's just completely different. It's not as romantic. It's not as special, it's not as beautiful. And so I think just that in itself really shows the importance of lighting and how darkness and city lights and, you know, fake lights can kind of set a certain mood compared to daylight. So yeah, I'm excited to see the next video, or the next movie. Okay, so I just finished watching the second movie in the Before trilogy, Before Sunset. And so this movie, I think, had a completely different dynamic than the first movie. While the characters and actors were the same, you know, the span of 9 years, you could really tell that they changed a lot. I mean, Jesse's now married with a kid, and Celine has a boyfriend. And so I really kind of feel like in this second movie, they almost swapped roles in their viewpoints in the world. I felt like in the first movie, Celine was very optimistic, and I mean, she even admits like she romanticized things in the past, and you know, just very optimistic, where Jesse was kind of more pessimistic. And I feel like in this movie, it was kind of the opposite. She was very much just so gung-ho on how the world is doing horrible and it's a mess and she's a mess, and he was almost like, well, yeah, I get that, but things can still go well. So I thought that was really interesting, just the idea of how time has passed, and especially within their situation, neither one of them had really moved on from that one night 9 years ago. So that was really interesting. One of the scenes that I thought was really intriguing was whenever they were on the boat and they kept going under the bridges, and it would be just almost completely dark, like you could barely see the characters, and then all of a sudden they would be in the light. And so I kind of felt like that almost represented them, like there were parts of them that were still in the dark. Like many times they wouldn't be honest with one another, like, oh, did you really think about me? Did you really dream about me? And you can tell they totally did, but they wouldn't full on admit to it, so that was almost like them in the dark. But then there were instances whenever like Celine sang that song for him, and whenever Jesse did share about his dreams and even the book, like they were in the light in those moments. So I feel like that whole passing under the bridge into the dark and light just kind of was almost like a visual representation of their relationship. So I thought that was all really interesting. This was definitely like a really short movie. I was kind of surprised that it just ended like that. I have no idea what to expect for the next one at all. But one other thing that I thought was really interesting, I know there's a lot of walk and talks in the first one, but the walk and talks in the second one were almost a little bit more interesting, and the way where I felt like they almost had to get to know each other a little bit better before they felt comfortable, which was really interesting to me. And these walk and talks seemed more formal, like they felt like full-on walk and talks, and I don't know if maybe I just noticed it more this time because I was almost expecting it, but I almost didn't like the walk and talks as much in this one. They almost seemed too staged to me. It was almost kind of a repetition of the first one, but overall, very interesting, and I'm excited to see the final film. Okay, so I have finished the entire series, but first I'm going to be talking about the last movie in this trilogy, Before Midnight. Takes place in 2013, and this was definitely, I feel like, very separate from the rest of the films. In some ways, there were definitely many walk and talks still incorporated, but one thing that I thought was really interesting is you got to see, we as, you know, the audience got to see kind of the transition of like how technology has advanced, and so now there's not just walk and talks, it's sitting in the car and talking. So there was a whole like very long segment of the couple, you know, driving in the car, and you get to see the scenery in the background, you see the girl sitting in the back, and they're just talking kind of like a normal walk and talk, and it was very long. Like, I feel like compared to other movies, you're in the car for just a little bit, but this was a really big segment of the movie, so I thought that was just an interesting like variation of the walk and talk. And then I thought it was really interesting just to see how they kind of talked about how time had gone by. You know, they kind of talked about the past, and they still are talking about that first time that they met one another. So that was really interesting and cool to see that they're incorporating that into the movie. I will say this movie definitely made me kind of mad just about how they ended up living their lives. Recalling the beginning of this trilogy, not trying to, you know, compare it all, but they were very hopeful and weren't wanting to live their lives as divorced and not in love, but it really seems like that's what ended up happening anyway. Jesse divorced his first wife, and now they're together and they're not married, and just the whole movie was almost cynical. Like it just seemed like they were going to break up at any moment and they weren't going to be together anymore. But there was also, I think, you know, them fighting for one another. It's like they kept talking about breaking up, and they kept talking about not, you know, maybe this isn't going to work out, but they never actually left. And when someone did leave, like when Celine left the hotel room at the end, Jesse went after her. So yeah, it was a little more difficult to swallow, this movie. It really wasn't enjoyable to me at all. They were constantly fighting and bickering, and Celine was just felt like she was testing Jesse, and if his answer wasn't exactly what she wanted, that was it. And she kept, you know, saying, oh, we're moving to Chicago, and he didn't even bring it up. And now, of course, we don't know the relationship in full. Maybe he has brought it up in the past, but... And then Jesse himself, he was just never fully answering the questions she was asking and just diverting the questions. So, yeah, overall, this movie wasn't my favorite, but I do think it does have some good points with the whole car walk and talk and the continued walk and talk. And just in general, the quality of the movie was just really bright and really good quality in that way. So, yeah. Okay, so now that I have finished all 3 of the movies in the Before trilogy, I'm going to be discussing this trilogy as a whole. So this is a very unique trilogy. I have never seen anything like it. I feel anytime that I've seen any sort of trilogy when it comes to films has always been kind of either science fiction or really, really cheesy romance, like high school romance. But even then, I feel like it's only like 2 movies. And it's always been like the first one was really good, and then they did the second one and they ruined it, where I feel like this trilogy really did a good job of you know, staying very together, and it was really cool to me how each movie was a span of 9 years within the movie, but then also in real life. Like, I'm very curious to learn if they knew from the start that they were going to do that, or if they just created this movie and then decided to do the 9 years later after. So that was really interesting. I think obviously the main characters, Celine and Jesse, you know, their relationship is, you know, the whole plot of this movie, this trilogy. And it was really interesting to see it, you know, span over so many years. In the beginning, they're very hopeful and young and naive and really having high hopes for love. And not wanting to fall into the same pit that their parents did, or that they see everyone else in a relationship in. And we find in the second one that they kind of do. You know, Jesse marries a girl that he doesn't really love. Celine is with a man that, you know, she's not really into. She likes that he's gone a lot because she'd rather be alone. And you're almost still hopeful for them to be together in a way. But then in the third one, they are together and they've been together, they have 2 kids, and it's just all gone downhill. I just feel like their relationship is not what it was in the beginning, and obviously it's not going to be that way. I have very high hopes for their relationship by the end of it, and I'm not really rooting for them anymore. I feel like they're constantly fighting and that they're not meant for each other, whenever in the first one I did feel that way. So that's really interesting. You know, I feel like it shows reality. It's not just your another happy-go-lucky rom-com. It got pretty serious. Overall, this trilogy really kind of touched upon like a few things outside of the relationship too. You know, it really discussed, didn't really discuss, but used walk and talks. There were different types of lighting, from, you know, the night to the sunrise to midnight. All of those were incorporated, and then just how their lives changed, and also how technology and society was changing as well. So overall, this is a really interesting trilogy. Never seen anything like it before, and I'm excited to learn more about it and dive deeper into, you know, what actually went on in creating this trilogy. Hello, so this is my final video. I have finished watching the whole trilogy, and also the videos that kind of go along with it, talking about behind the scenes and the production of these films. And so I think watching all those different videos, I'm not sure how many there were, like 5 or 6 maybe, definitely gave me a new perspective onto this trilogy. There were a lot of things that they did touch base upon, about how, you know, this is telling the story of love over a course of time. But there were also some really cool aspects that I didn't realize. and it kind of gave me a new perspective. For example, one of the things that kind of opened my eyes was in the last movie, I really didn't feel like Celine and Jesse were in love anymore, and I wasn't rooting for them. But then after watching the first or second video, they really discussed how their fighting actually made their love more intimate and made their connection seem more intimate, because they were able to be so vulnerable and so open with one another. So they really truly were so in love, and there was such a big connection that they weren't afraid to share with one another how they were truly feeling, and their deep, dark feelings. And I definitely get that. I think at first I just was like, they're fighting, but kind of looking deeper into it and getting that perspective, I can totally see where they're coming from, and I can definitely relate to that. Because, I know that there are certain people in my life, that I don't know as well, that it's like if I have a problem with them or something like that, I don't want to talk, I don't want to tell them, I don't want to, share my feelings, I don't want to hurt their feelings. Where the people that I'm closest with, like my friends and family and my fiance, like I can tell them anything and it's fine, and I know that they'll, they're not going to judge me, and if they do judge me, it's just very different. So that was definitely eye-opening, and I'm really glad that I was able to see that perspective. Another thing that I thought was so interesting was they always talked about the three. So it wasn't just Jesse and Celine, it was Jesse, Celine, and the director, or Ethan and, I can't remember Celine's real name at the moment, but all of them working together and, writing with one another and, really not necessarily improvising, but in a way improvising, and they just kind of collaborated a lot. And I think it really does show within the films, this connection that they all had, and it was just so well portrayed. I also thought it was really interesting in one of the later ones how they talked about in the second movie of the trilogy, how they had such a short time to film, over a course of time, but also within the day. Like they had to film, late afternoon into the evening, or no, not even into the evening, to late afternoon, or the lighting would have been off with different scenes. So that was really interesting to think about. But yeah, overall, I think these videos were a really great companion and really kind of opened my eyes to things that I didn't see originally. So yeah.